Hey readers, welcome back to our I think third week of at-home learning. So before I start with this week's lesson, I want to refresh your memory about last week's lesson. Last week we talked about paraphrasing, retelling, right? And we said that when we paraphrase or retell, we are taking a text, details, facts that another author wrote. We read it and then we retell it in our own words, right? And we know there were two tips. Tip number one was we can use synonyms to help us retell in our own words. And tip number two was that we should have a paraphrase or a retell that is the same length as the original text. So, but now that I'm thinking, how many times are we asked to retell or paraphrase a text that is super, super long? Usually, when we paraphrase something, it comes from an article that may be a few pages long. So, at most, you're paraphrasing in small chunks. But as readers, we do have to think about um, recapping or telling a story that can be super, super long. Think about Tiger Rising. That was like 300 pages. So to paraphrase or retell that, we could retell it in chunks, right? But to retell or paraphrase the whole thing would take forever. We'd be writing 200 pages. So I thought it was important to introduce summarizing. Summarizing is different than paraphrasing or retelling. And the biggest difference is look at the screen. Do you know? The biggest difference is paraphrasing, right? When you paraphrase, it's this long. When you summarize 200 pages, it's not as long as the original text. It's shorter and sweeter. Okay, so readers, in this lesson, I only want to focus on summarizing narratives, stories, fiction. We will learn how to summarize nonfiction in another lesson, but in this lesson, I want to focus on fiction. So, when we think about fiction and stories, let's think about the beginning of the year and what we learned about parts of a story. Okay? Think about the different parts of a story quickly. And what are the most important parts of a story? Well, let me see if I can move my slide up here. Um, I remember, of course, characters are important. The main character, okay? Setting, we've talked about setting being important. The problem or the conflict. And then I remember that like roller coaster or that hill, we called it a story arc, right? The problem starts, it gets worse, and then you have this problem gets better, the resolution. And in between all those spots are all the different details that lead to the problem getting better. So those are, of course, the important parts of a story. But remember, when we're writing a summary, we need it to be short and sweet. So I'm going to look at all these important parts and I'm going to try to pick out maybe 3 or 4 of the most important to guide me in writing my summary. Hold that thought for 1 second. Okay, so when you write a summary, you need to know all the parts of a story. That's true. But in a summary, you are only going to share the most important parts. So, in thinking how to do this, I generated what I thought the most important parts of a story are and how we should include them in our summary. So, of course, the character, okay? And then the motivation. Motivation means what motivated the character. What did they want? Every character wants something or they need something, right? Then there's a conflict, right? That's the problem. What's the problem? What does the character want or need but can't have? Okay. Then you have the climax, right? That's not all the way at the end of the story, but it's right before the end. And it finally starts to get better, right? That character may have tried 4 or 5 times, and then finally it starts to get better. Or he may have tried 4 or 5 different ways to get what he wanted or needed. But at the climax, he's finally starting to figure it out. And then the resolution is, what's the character like now at the end, right? What's the ending like? Okay. So I have this anchor chart, right? And this is something that can help you when summarizing a fiction text. Some of you may have seen it in third grade. I introduced it, I think, in the beginning of the year in one of our centers. But let's review it. So again, this anchor is going to help us summarize the important parts of our story. So it can be short but sweet. You have the somebody. Who do you think the somebody is? It is who is the story about? The main character, okay? That's your somebody. Want it. What does she or he want to do? What does he or she want or need? But what is the problem? What is the conflict? Why or what is standing in the way of that character getting what he or she wants or needs? So, what did he or she try to do? And then, how was the problem solved, right? What is the resolution? So, this anchor chart will guide you as you practice or as you get better at summarizing. So, Ms Mozol would like to try this with you today. We're going to do it a few times. I'll do it first, and then we'll do it together, and then you can practice on your own. So I try to use a story that I think we're all familiar with, and it's the story of Little Red Riding Hood. So who is the main character, right? Who's the somebody? I'm going to do Little Red Riding Hood. All right. What did Little Red Riding Hood want? Well, she wanted to take her sick grandmother some treats, some cookies, something like that, some kind of present. But what is the problem? Well, she encounters, right? She encountered a wolf who tried to eat her. He tricked her, right? He tricked her and tried to eat her. So, what did she do? Well, she ran for help. She ran for help, but boys and girls, readers, that's not the end. That is not the resolution. The resolution is when she found the woodsman and he helped her, right? The woodsman. All right, let's try and do one together. So another popular story is Wizard of Oz. So let's try this one together. Who is the story about in The Wizard of Oz? Well, the main character is Dorothy, right? What does she want to do, right? What does she want? Think about that for a minute. Well, she wants to go home, okay? But what is the problem? She can't find her way home. She doesn't know how to get home, right? She's stuck in Oz. So what did she try to do so that she could find her way home? Well, she found the yellow brick road, right? And she knew that if she followed the yellow brick road, it would bring her to the Wizard of Oz, who could tell her how to get home, right? But then at the very end, she wakes up and she realizes it was all a dream. Okay? Short and sweet. Wizard of Oz is a very, very long book, a very, very long movie. But look at my summary. It may be 3 sentences long. All right, let's try another one together. Cinderella, right? That's a popular fairy tale. So, who's the story about? Who's the main character? You got it, right? Cinderella. What does Cinderella want to do? She wants to go to the ball. But what is the problem? Her evil stepmother won't let her go. So, what did she try to do? Well, so her fairy godmother tried to help her, right? And she did. She helped her. She helped her go to the ball. Then, how was the problem solved? What was Cinderella like at the very end? Who was she with, right? She lives happily ever after with Prince Charming. Okay, let's see. So now Ms Mozol is going to read for you a narrative, a short story. It's called The Skeleton Key. And what I would like for you to do when I'm finished reading this is I want you to rewind and copy this anchor chart onto a piece of paper and see if you can summarize using the anchor chart the text that I have here for you. Okay. Eric rang his grandparents' doorbell and silently wished the next 4 hours would go by quickly. He didn't want to give up his entire Saturday afternoon at his grandparents' house where there were no kids in the neighborhood. "You're right on time," Grandma Bethany said, opening the door. "There's tea and cake in the dining room." Cake? At least the first 10 minutes would go by quickly. Eric hung his coat on the rack by the door and saw a strange-looking key hanging on a hook. "Grandpa Bill, what's this funny key for?" "That's a skeleton key. It opens the best room in the house." Grandpa Bill whispered so no one else could hear. "It's the room I go to when your grandmother tries to make me help her with the dishes." "What's so special about the room?" Eric asked. "It's a game room," Grandpa Bill said. "Take the key and see if you can find the room by the time I finish my tea." Eric grabbed the key and stared at it. A skeleton key? It looks old. Eric decided the oldest things in the house were probably upstairs in the walk-up attic. He headed past the dining room and to the stairs. Grandpa Bill sipped his tea and shook his head. Eric knew that meant he was going the wrong way, so he headed back to the front door where he'd found the key. Eric thought about the oldest part of a house, the basement. It's the first part that's built. He rushed to the basement door and looked at the lock. It was different from the normal lock. He slid the key inside and turned it. With a click, the door opened. Eric switched on the light and walked down the stairs. The basement was one giant room with a pool table in the middle and a dartboard on the far wall. "Awesome," Eric said. "Ever learn to play pool?" Grandpa Bill asked, coming down the stairs. "No," Eric said. "Well then, grab a cue from the rack and I'll teach you." Eric smiled. The next 4 hours were going to fly by. Okay, so I want you to use this text and I want you to summarize it using the anchor chart that Ms Mozol practiced with you earlier in this video. Okay, good luck, and we will discuss this text that I just read to you, and your anchor chart, and we'll see if you summarized it correctly. See you soon. I miss you.